Hey guys, I'm Mark, and today I wanted to do a video about soil. I want to talk about my soil and what was in it when I grew my tomatoes in the soil last year. I had a lot of comments and questions about what do I feed my plants, what's in the soil, how do I get the tomatoes that big, so on and so forth. So I thought I'd tell you a little bit about what was in it, what's in it now, and what my plan is going forward. I also want to touch on mulch. Different kinds of mulches, because I think mulch is really almost just as important as the soil itself. So to get started, this over here to my left is what I started with. This is regular topsoil. This is what's underneath this grass right now. It's I guess Piedmont Plateau, Maryland topsoil. It's very heavy. It's very clay-based. There's not a lot of moving life going on in it. There's hardly any earthworms or anything like that to start with, and it's very hard to break apart. Like when we get into summer, hot summer, and things dry out a good bit, certain areas of this farm, it's almost like concrete because the high clay content is just so dense. So I added, last year I added cow manure. And this cow manure in particular has a lot of humus in it. It's got a lot of straw broken down into it, and it has a ton of worms in it. So last year, that's all that was in here. Last year was this and this. It was 2 parts this to 1 part this. Now it seems like a lot for manure, but this manure it's not that hot. You call it hot. When it's really fresh, it can burn your plants. I didn't think it was all too hot because, number one, it was full of worms. Let's see if I can, here, I'll just dump it out. I'll clean it up later. You can see it's just got tons of worms in there. And if it was super hot, there wouldn't be a whole lot of worms in there. And number two, there wouldn't be a whole lot of plants growing on top of the pile like there are, just covered in grass and all kinds of weeds and things. So I knew that I could get away with using a lot more of this than I would be able to get away with if it was like really raw or fresh manure. This manure has no smell, hardly. It smells like earth. It smells like old leaves or something like that. I wouldn't be digging in here with my bare hands if that weren't the case. Hey, baby girl, no, you're not. Yeah, you're not eating the. She likes to eat the cow manure, believe it or not. Stop. No. All right. Anyway, so that's all that was in there last year. 2 parts this, 1 part this. This year, I'm going to add what we call mushroom soil. In Maryland, we're fortunate enough to be located not too far from the mushroom capital of the United States, in Pennsylvania. It's apparently where they grow most of the mushrooms in the country. And this is what they grow mushrooms in. It's basically a lot of straw. There's some manure in there. I mean, it varies batch to batch, but overall, it's a pretty good source of organic matter for me, and it's going to help, I think, a lot with soil structure and increasing the ability for the soil to break apart, or friability, if you will. This cow manure was good for that, but it's mostly straw and it's mostly broken down by now. So I think a good helping of this is going to help keep things going, if that makes sense. So 2 parts that, 1 part that, and now 1 part that gets you what I have currently, which is this. I tilled it all together, and this is the end result, and this is what I'm going to be growing in this year. I think I've got the soil structure to where I like it. I can ball it up like a snowball, and I can easily crack it apart with my fingers. And that's pretty much what you want to shoot for. Yeah, that's sand. We're going to get to that next. I think that I'm going to try to add some sand because, well, we had down that way is the river, and last year we had the river jump the bank, and when it did that, it deposited this huge pile of sand, and now I've got this nice pile of sand that I can dig into, and I think I'm going to harvest some of it before the river jumps the bank again and washes it all away. So I'm going to take advantage of the opportunity. I think I'm going to add some sand into the situation to have a little bit more soil friability long term. Once a lot of this humus breaks down and things, it's going to be good to have the sand in there to help keep things friable and help the soil break apart long term. It's also really good, I feel. I mean, the river gave it to me, and it was really well mixed up, and I think it's going to contain a lot of trace minerals, all kinds of goodies that can be added to the soil as well. All right, so that soil, I guess the overall goal long term is to build something that's basically a really good ecosystem. So soil is what's feeding your plants. I don't feed my plants, I feed the soil. And I want to create a good ecosystem for microorganisms to live. That's basically the whole key concept here. There's over a billion, there could be over a billion microbes in a teaspoon of healthy garden soil. And that's ultimately where you want to gear your efforts towards, is making those microbes happy and creating a nice place for them to live. So the first step for me, in my case, I want to build a good matrix where there's a lot of humus, there's a lot of micronutrients available. I want to incorporate earthworms and all kinds of whatever's living in here, and ultimately just build up that ecosystem. Just keep adding things over time. And ultimately, that's what's going to ensure that your plants have a good diet long term and for many years to come. That being said, once you create that environment in the soil where you got the moisture right, you got drainage right, you got things for all those microbes to feed on, you're going to want to protect it then. You're going to put a roof over it, at least for the really brutal parts of the year, like in the hot parts of summer and in the really cold parts of winter. You want to insulate things. The soil microbes basically like the temperature pretty much like we like it. Mid-70s, somewhere around there. They really don't like things too hot, and they really don't like things too cold in order to do their work and for them to be the most active. So in the summertime, it's nice to keep the soil covered because it keeps things cool underneath, and in the wintertime, you have the opposite. So I use several different kinds of mulches to cover my soil. It all depends really on what I have available to me. That's a lot of it. This farm has a lot of grass, so I'll start there. These are just grass clippings that I can round up with a track vac. Track vac is a machine that we pull behind the lawnmower, and it just sucks up the grass clippings. Makes it really easy for me. If you didn't have that, you just run over your grass and kind of blow it all into one direction and rake it up later. It's nice to let it dry in the sun a little bit first if you can. The grass clippings make an excellent annual mulch, I guess I would call it. I call it an annual mulch because it's a mulch that you can put down in a situation where you're going to be tilling the soil again, either later that season or at the end of the year. And you can till this right back into the soil and not have to worry about worry about adding too much of the wrong thing. It's also great just as a cover in general for weeds, because when you lay down grass clippings and you get rain on them or you wet them down, it forms this really nice like mat. Like they all kind of lock together, and it becomes very difficult for weeds to come up through. So it's excellent for that. It's also fairly high in nitrogen. So as it breaks down, it's going to feed your plants a little bit of that. Grass clippings, one of my favorite. Another annual mulch, something that you can put down and then till back in later, shredded leaves. We have a lot of trees here, and shredded leaves are an awesome gift in the fall. Again, just run them over with your lawnmower, kind of blow them in all one direction. You can collect them up later. Try to get them as shredded as you can, because the more shredded you get them, the harder it is for them to blow away in the wind. I mean, you don't want to work all day to cover your bed with leaves just to have them all blow away by the next week. So the more that you shred them, the more they seem to stay in place, I find. But leaves are great because they contain a lot of micronutrients. I mean, if you think about it, trees have really deep roots. They go far down, and they're bringing up things that are basically inaccessible to something like grass. And when they bring those nutrients up, they lock them in their leaves. The leaves fall down, and they become accessible to us to use in our gardens. So they're wonderful for that also. One of the best things I think you can incorporate into your soil would be shredded leaves mixed with manure or leaf mold. If you leave shredded leaves and you just kind of compost them, if you will, add a little bit of this or add a little bit of food scraps, wherever you got, and just sort of compost the leaves by themselves until they turn into what's called leaf mold. That's excellent stuff. So that's leaves. Well, while I'm talking about leaves, actually, I'll point out, as a matter of fact, this bed right here to my right, I covered in shredded leaves in the fall. And I haven't touched this bed all year so far. I mean, it's May now, and there's really not many weeds in there, relatively. I did do a little bit of hoeing, I will admit, this morning on the far corner, but everything else, like closer to me, I haven't touched at all. And you can see there's hardly anything in there. There are some potatoes popping up from where I grew them last year, if you want to call those weeds, but stop. You need so much attention. We'll play after the video, I promise. Every time she sticks her nose in here, I'm worried she's eating something. I don't like her eating the cow manure. She wants to eat the cow manure, believe it or not. Anyway, those are two good annual mulches. Oh, another annual mulch, straw. Straw is great. I don't use it as much because we don't have equipment here on the farm to harvest our own straw, so I'd have to buy it. I still buy it locally, so it doesn't cost that much, especially in the fall. But if you can get access to mulch, I mean, if you can get access to straw, excuse me, it's really, really good stuff. It holds the moisture in the soil very, very well. It's also a nice bright color, so it reflects the sunlight a little bit back up onto the underside of the plants, gets things dried off a little bit. It's also from being light in color, it doesn't absorb a lot of heat. So like in the hot parts of summer, and if you have your beds covered in something like this, and something that's black, it's gonna draw in and retain a lot of heat. And certain plants are not gonna like that much, so straw might be a better option. Straw is also really good as a habitat for spiders. And spiders are, I've mentioned this before, spiders are an awesome ally to have in the garden. They take care of all different kinds of pests, and they seem to really, really like to live in straw. There are also hardwood mulches, or in my case, I would call them perennial mulches. So we covered the two annual mulches, but these two here, these are hardwood mulches. This one right here in front of me is just regular arborist wood chips. Arborist companies go around, they cut up people's trees, or they cut trees off the side of the road, and they put them through a chipper, and then they usually are just trying to look for a quick place to get rid of them. So if you call up your local tree companies and you ask them, hey, would you mind dumping your wood chips at my place? Then usually, if you're willing to take enough of them, they might have no problem doing that at all. So that's an excellent free mulch. The reason why I call it a perennial mulch is because I would lay this down in a situation where it's not going to get tilled into the soil anytime soon. If you were to till this into the soil, that's a lot of carbon to put into the soil, and it's going to tie up a lot of your nitrogen. Microbes use nitrogen actually to break down carbon, and when you add too much carbon into the picture, something like this, then you can actually rob nitrogen out of your soil. So it's fine to put it on top, on the surface of the soil, I find, but I don't want it in a situation where I'm going to be reincorporating it back into the mix of things, if that makes sense. Same goes for, you've probably seen this around. This is just regular double shredded hardwood mulch. This particular batch is dyed black. Same deal, it's going to take a while to break down. That's what makes it good mulch in the landscape industry, is you can put it down and it'll last a while. But It's pretty much the same as as grass clippings or any kind of other covering, except it's just going to last a little bit longer. So that's the 5 main natural mulches I like to use. I did want to mention plastic mulch. I used a lot of this last year, specifically because, well, number one, it's very accessible to me. Being in the nursery business, we can get this for, it's not much effort at all. It's a dime a dozen in our industry, but I used this a lot last year, mainly because it was temporary. It was a quick fix. I could lay it out. It would take care of my problem instead of bringing in wheelbarrows and wheelbarrows and wheelbarrows of natural mulch that I'd have to save up, accumulate, or harvest in some sort of way. This took care of things really quickly. And I think that even going forward, I'm going to try to get away from using this as much as I can because, I mean, it's plastic and I don't want to be using plastic as much as possible. And I want to migrate into using more natural mulches as I can. I'm working on saving up compost. I'm working on getting a lot more wood chips composted to use them. And that stuff's going to take time, but in the meanwhile, I'm going to use this for a while, namely in the winter time, or when my beds are not being used for whatever reason. And I'll essentially just use it as like a pool cover. I'll put it down. It does a great job at that. Just you put it down, you leave it there, and then when you're ready to go back to your beds, you just take it off like a pool cover, and it's like turnkey. You don't have to do hardly anything. There's barely any weeds to pull. It's great. I think it also, like if you use it over the winter time, the fact that it's black, it almost like in early spring, it warms up the bed a little bit, and I think it almost like jogs things to get started a little bit earlier, if that makes sense. That's just the theory. I have no way of knowing or testing that, but I think that it does raise the soil temperature by a little bit. So that's plastic mulch. Those are all the things that I've added. What are you doing? Ugh. Those are all the things that I've added or will add in the future, and just a little bit about my theory on soil and what I'm trying to create going forward. Like I say, I don't use any fertilizers at all so far. I don't use any kind of foliar sprays. I think if I'm going to add much of anything, it would be in the way of inoculants, get my hands on some beneficial bacteria, different things like that to try to incorporate them in. But other than that, I wouldn't add much. Maybe limestone. Got a bag of limestone here. That's if I'm in a situation where I'm adding something that's very acidic. Let's say like if I add maybe sawdust or something like that, that would lower the pH. Then I try to neutralize it or bring it back up with limestone. Limestone's also really good for tomatoes in terms of skin health. Specifically, tomatoes can be prone to blossom end rot, and limestone will help with that. The calcium helps with that. And they'll take a pretty heavy feeding. Tomatoes will tolerate a pretty heavy feeding of limestone, I've found in the past. But other than that, I think that's pretty much it. All the bases that I wanted to cover. It's just a little bit about where my soil is now, where I want to go moving forward, and how I think I want to get there. So I hope you learned something. Thanks for watching. See you next time.